Tamriel has borne its fair share of evil in the world. From the beginning, from Nirn's creation at the hands of the Aedra, evil has festered deep. The Ayleids of Cyrodiil, a once powerful yet terrible race of Mer, were a society built on the works of evil. From the worship of the more unkind Daedra, to mass enslavement of the human races of Tamriel, the Ayleids cared little for the distinction between what is right and what is wrong. At least outside of their own race. That said, what is right and wrong seems to change throughout history. For all their wrongdoings, it was the enslavement of mankind that would be their undoing. Slaves would rise up against their masters, and a year-long bloody conflict would spread across the lands of the Ayleids, concluding with their defeat. But, leading these elves in a last struggle against their former slaves, was an Ayleid sorcerer-king of great power, a champion of his race, and the final hope for the ancient elves of Cyrodiil. His name was Umaril, but he was better known as Umaril the Unfeathered. Hello everyone, I am RedBeakRaven and welcome to the story of Umaril the Unfeathered, so sit back and relax, watch and or listen, as we dive into the story of one of the last kings of the Ayleids. During the Merithic era, Cyrodiil was ruled by a race of elves descended from the ancient race of Mer known as the Aldmer. Those Aldmer that ventured into Cyrodiil and settled in the province eventually became the Ayleids, also known as the Wild Elves or Heartland High Elves. Here in what would become the Imperial Province was where the Ayleids established the first empire on Tamriel. Throughout the Merithic era and for the first 200 years of the First, the Elven Empire grew in both size and power, occupying most of Cyrodiil and pieces of territory in High Rock, Hammerfell, Valenwood and even Black Marsh. But the first 2 centuries of the First Era would see the great empire's foundations begin to crumble. The Ayleid kingdoms were riddled with strife in this time. Eventually, a civil war broke out, followed by a slave rebellion that would bring about both the end of the Ayleid Empire and the race's presumed extinction. The great First Tamrielic Empire was not one like those that came after it. There was no singular ruler banding the elves together, but rather the Dominion was made up of various Ayleid kingdoms united under this single empire. Thus it had many kings and queens within itself, each ruling their own kingdoms and expanding their borders. Though the Ayleids were far from weak, they didn't carve out their empire alone. Many wild elves took to worship in Daedra, alongside their own set of Aedra. As the years went on since the Merithic era, the worship of Daedra spread throughout the Ayleid society, and this led to the elves making deals with the not-so-kind Daedric princes. Deals for more power, and armies of Daedra that were unleashed upon the humans of Cyrodiil and the surrounding provinces. One such Daedric prince the Ayleids were fond of was Meridia, the Lady of Infinite Energies and a Daedric prince often considered not wholly evil. However, Meridia is no Mara. In a pact between her and her elven patrons, she bestowed upon the Ayleids armies of her Aurorans, creatures of the Coloured Rooms, a realm of Oblivion created and ruled by Meridia herself. But she may have done more than give the elves an army of Daedra. She may have given them an immortal champion. The sorcerer-king, Umaril the Unfeathered. Like most things in the First Era, we don't know a great deal about Umaril, save for what followed the beginning of the end for the Ayleids. Umaril was no ordinary wild elf, but a half-elf. It is stated his mother was an Ayleid, but his father a divine. Which divine? Well, to this day that remains a mystery, though it is noted that Umaril spoke of his father, describing him as one from a previous Kalpa, a period of time comprised of the birth, life and death of that specific age. Umaril, alongside the pact between the Ayleids and Meridia, formed a personal alliance with the hater of the undead. He was one of Meridia's greatest champions, and one of great value as he was a rare sight being the son of a god, and therefore, immortal. The Ayleids and their armies of Daedra dominated and enslaved the human population of Cyrodiil, who at the time were mostly made up of a race known as the Needs, or Nedic people. Many Ayleids revelled in the capturing of humans, and some took great pleasure in bringing pain to what they considered the lesser race. The Wild Elven Empire's aristocracy was a pit of cruelty and arrogance. More often than not, Ayleid kings and queens and dedicated Daedra worshippers would partake in torture for sport that many turned into an art form, with inspiration from the cruelty of their Daedra patrons. For many generations, the haughty Ayleids were the slave masters of the Needs, until one day in the 242nd year of the First Era, a Nedic woman sparked the fires of rebellion. Amidst the Ayleid civil war came an uprising of slaves united and inspired by a former slave known as Al-Esh, but became better known as Elysia. Elysia, along with her champions, the great supposedly winged man-bull Morihaus and the legendary Pelinal Whitestrake, led a slave rebellion against the Ayleids in 1E242. With aid from the Nords and some rebel Ayleid lords and apparently the Aedra, the Elysian slave rebellion decimated the once great empire of the Wild Elves. Many Ayleid cities fell during this time. Some fell into the hands of the rebels, whereas others were completely annihilated thanks to Whitestrake and his infamous homicidal madness. Pelinal was feared by the Ayleids, and it is said that his power was unmatched, until one day, a foe of probable equal power called out the hero of the revolution. At some point before or during the war, Umaril the Unfeathered was made the Ayleid's champion, and he eventually challenged the legendary Whitestrake. For the first time since his coming, it was Pelinal who was called out to battle by another, for Umaril had the blood of the adder, and would never know death. The latter piece of information and what follows mostly comes from the Song of Pelinal, a series of books that are said to be made up of old fragments taken from an old manuscript that possibly dates all the way back to the Second Era. They detail what happened before, during and after the fall of White Gold Tower, all in relation to Whitestrake of course. The accounts state and imply that Umaril's armies were driven out of the eastern Niben lands. Eventually, Elysia's army surrounded the remaining Ayleid forces at their capital in the centre of the Niben, White Gold Tower. However, Elysia's army and her allies hesitated to attack White Gold, and thus caused Pelinal to build up a senseless rage, resulting in him storming the Great Tower and facing Umaril alone. Whitestrake sought a fight between only him and the sorcerer-king, but upon arriving at the citadel, Umaril displayed his apparent preference to weaken or perhaps destroy his foes from a distance. It is stated that Umaril preferred ruin from afar, meaning he favoured to send his minions to attack and weaken his enemies before engaging in combat himself. Some would argue it was the smart play to avoid direct confrontation when possible, though you could see this as cowardly. However, Umaril was not a foe to underestimate, and his skill in battle matched that of Pelinal. Well, almost matched. As Pelinal entered the capital, Umaril sent his soldiers to weaken the great warrior, knowing full well that his forces would fall to the divine crusader. Eventually, dead Aurorans littered White Gold Tower, and the remaining Ayleid kings supporting Umaril surrounded the crusader. As they grouped around him, Whitestrake smashed his mace against the floor before them, and demanded that the one who called him out present himself, but Umaril did not yet come. The Ayleid kings retreated, and the sorcerer-king sent even more soldiers to die fighting Pelinal. But even though they couldn't kill him, they did eventually weaken him. Whitestrake had bled, and Umaril took great delight in this. After supposedly listing his bloodline in the language of the Ayleids, Umaril finally faced his long-awaited opponent in single combat. The two champions, equally matched, fought and wounded each other in what was probably one of the fiercest one-on-one fights in Tamriel's history. Despite weakening Whitestrake before he engaged him, Umaril eventually fell to the champion of Elysia. There the sorcerer-king lay dead, his helmet dented, to which Pelinal laughed at, and his unfeathered wings that gave him the name the Unfeathered were broken off. Whitestrake stood there and insulted Umaril's ancestry, and that of those who came from the mythical continent of Old Maris. This greatly angered the remaining Ayleid kings, who then surrounded the victor and cut him into 8 pieces. Once the Elysian forces entered the citadel looking for more Ayleids to kill, they found none except the kings and their demons, likely Aurorans that began to flee. According to the old manuscript recovered from the monastery ruin that the Song of Pelinal gets its information from, Morihaus found the only piece of Pelinal the Ayleid kings left for him to find: his head. but due to the nature of Whitestrake supposedly being immortal, he was still able to briefly speak to Morehouse. However, what was said between the two is unknown, though it is said that the Crusader warned Morehouse of Umaril's return. And there more or less ends the Song of Pelinal account. It's worth noting that Pelinal was not without a certain powerful aid in his crusade against the Ayleids. It is believed that his armour and weapons, the later known as relics of the Crusader, were crafted and given to him by the 8 divines themselves, therefore lending their aid in the defeat of the sorcerer-king, something that Umaril would not forget. Umaril the Unfeathered was defeated by Pelinal Whitestrake, a defeat that would finally bring victory to Elysia and her allies. The Elysian slave rebellion was over, and by 1E243 the Elysian Empire was born, and the Ayleid Empire was gone. Though Umaril was defeated, he wasn't truly killed. It's not known for certain how Umaril was able to continue on, or rather how he was able to return to life in the realm of Mundus. It is speculated that Umaril bound himself to Meridia's realm of Oblivion, the coloured rooms, but then there are statements that it was his divine blood that kept him alive, and that his spirit was cast adrift in Oblivion, and that his alliance with Meridia allowed his spirit to reside in her realm until the time came when he was able to return to Mundus. Or there is the simple belief by some that Meridia granted him immortality, and it was her gift that allowed him to escape death, not his divine blood. Regardless of how and why Umaril survived, it wouldn't be until the Third Era when talk of the Unfeathered would be heard again. For thousands of years, Umaril remained trapped outside of Mundus until one day at the end of the Third Era, he was able to return to Tamriel. In the dark year of 3E433, the year of the Oblivion Crisis and the end of the Great Septim Dynasty, Umaril walked the earth once again, and returned with a strong desire to wreak vengeance upon the divines who aided in his initial defeat. Though his exact goals were and are still unknown, Umaril brought with him many of Meridia's Aurorans and set some of them on the Chapel of Dibella in Anvil, a harbour city on Cyrodiil's Gold Coast. The Daedra desecrated the chapel, killing all within and smearing their blood on the floor to form runes of the Ayleids which, according to a prophet, said, "By the eternal power of Umaril, the mortal god shall be cast down." It is not known why Umaril chose or more likely was able to return to Mundus at this time. It is more than likely that it was the darkening of the dragon fires that brought down the barriers between Oblivion and Mundus that finally allowed Umaril to return. Then again, Oblivion isn't entirely cut off from the mortal plane, and Umaril did not bring with him an army of Daedra like those he commanded back when he had a kingdom to rule. Word spread fast across Cyrodiil of the Anvil Chapel attack, and the prophet who came and shed light on this terrible event. For a short while the prophet of Anvil preached and prayed in the streets of the harbour city, and some thought nothing of his ramblings, but those that stood and really listened began to change their tunes. The prophet spoke of Umaril's return, and that Tamriel itself was in dire need of a champion to defeat the sorcerer-king returned, a champion of the divines, with their aid by means of the Crusaders' relics. Pelinal Whitestrake's armour and weapons were lost after his death. Eventually, some were recovered by an order of knights known as the Knights of the Nine. The order was established in 3E111, and it had an ambitious objective in the recovery of Whitestrake's lost relics. Sir Amiel Lannis, a hero of the War of the Isle, created the order and set up base at the Priory of the Nine in the Westweald region of southern Cyrodiil. His friends Sir Caius and Sir Torolf also joined the order, and together they defeated the Worm of Ellinglen and recovered the cuirass of the Crusader. Following this victory, the knight's reputation soared, and eventually the group of 3 became a group of 9. 3 more relics were quickly recovered, the Crusaders' gauntlets, greaves and sword, but this early success would not continue. The War of the Red Diamond, beginning in 3E121, caused a few of the knights to abandon the order and fight in the civil war between Sepphoris Septim I, Magnus Septim and Queen Potima of Solitude. The 4 relics the order recovered were lost, with the exception of the gauntlets that remained on the floor of Coral's Chapel of Stendar, unable to be carried by anyone not affected by the curse of the Consumed. The Order of Knights were eventually disbanded in 3E131. The Knights of the Order, with the exception of Sir Beric and Sir Caius, either died in the war or died searching for the remaining relics or protecting them. With Umaril's return in 3E433 and the relics lost, there was little hope for those that stood in the Unfeathered's way. That was until none other than the champion of Cyrodiil learned of Umaril's return and was sent on a pilgrimage by the Prophet of Anvil, and one by one miraculously recovered all of the relics of the Divine Crusader. The champion found the old Priory of the Nine and restored both it and the Order of the Knights of the Nine. Before long, this new order had its 9 knights and the 8 relics of Pelinal Whitestrake, and Umaril the Unfeathered had his very own challenger. From Galas Malatar on the Gold Coast, Umaril planned and carried out his personal war against the 9 divines, whom he often referred to as the mortal gods. As the new order of the Knights of the Nine grew and recovered the Crusaders' relics, Umaril sent his Auroran minions to attack and desecrate more chapels across Cyrodiil. The Chapel of Mara in Breville, one of Cyrodiil's poorest cities located on the Niben Bay, the Great Chapel of Arche in the eastern Cyrodiilic city of Chedenhall, and the Chapel of Zenithar in Leowyn, the far southeastern city of Cyrodiil. The latter 2 attacks were promptly repelled by the champion, but Breville's chapel fell to the Aurorans' merciless attack. However, this victory would be Umaril's last. The champion of Cyrodiil, the new Knight Commander of the Knights of the Nine, had quested hard and long for the Crusaders' relics and to build the Order to full strength. Eventually, the Order had its 9 knights, its base, its home restored, and it had 8 relics of the Divine Crusader. But it was missing something. Something that Pelinal Whitestrake himself did not have all those years ago when he defeated Umaril at White Gold Tower. Before the fabled Tiber Septim conquered all of Tamriel, there were 8 divines in the prominent pantheon created by Saint Alicia, but upon Tiber's death, he supposedly ascended to godhood, thus the 8 became the 9. The thing that this new order of knights was missing, the thing that Whitestrake did not have and couldn't have had, was the 9th relic, the Blessing of Talos. This granted the Knight Commander the ability to follow Umaril into the spiritual plane. You see, the ancient texts were somewhat right. The sorcerer-king would never know death, unless someone was able to defeat his physical form and destroy his spiritual. In the same year of Umaril's return, the restored Knights of the Nine launched an assault on the Unfeathered's lair. Umaril's Aurorans were plentiful in Galas Malatar, but it wasn't the Daedra themselves that threatened the knights. It was the dark orb that Umaril had kept there. The orb was filled with dark magic and was the source of power that somehow resurrected dead Aurorans. As the knights worked their way to the Caso level of the Ayleid ruin, they experienced firsthand the power of the orb. Every one of Umaril's soldiers they killed returned to life seconds later to fight on. Luckily, the champion of Cyrodiil eventually found and destroyed the orb, but in doing so, time in the Caso area stopped, and both the Aurorans and knights disappeared. It is still to this day not known what exactly the Dark Orb was, or what was its true purpose, or even where it came from. It was likely the work of Daedric, possibly a gift given to Umaril from his mistress Meridia herself, or perhaps the orb was one of his creations. Up until this point, Umaril did not actually know who had dared to enter his stronghold, but it didn't matter. He recognised the armour and weapons of Pelinal Whitestrake and did not hesitate to fight this new enemy. But, either by lack of skill or sheer arrogance, he was slain by the champion, defeated for a second time, and as expected, his spirit endured. Umaril had likely thought at this point that he would return once again and wreak havoc on all that is dedicated to the divines. But by the blessing of Talos, the champion followed the half-elf into the spiritual plane. Umaril was aghast at this scenario, calling out to the champion in the Ayleid language, "By what power do you follow me here?" There they battled once again, and for the third and last time in his life, Umaril the Unfeathered was defeated. With the sorcerer-king's death in both his physical and spiritual form, Umaril was utterly destroyed, and would never again threaten Tamriel. Or so it is believed. can a god really be killed? Can a half-god be put down for good? Especially one that was supposedly bound to a realm of Oblivion. We may never really know for sure. Where does one go when one's spirit is killed? That is a question of great wonder. It's been over 200 years since Umaril's true death, and no word has been heard of him since. But 200 years is nothing but a blink of an eye for an immortal being. If Umaril is truly gone, then it may be 1,000 years yet before we can be sure he will never again return. So what of his mistress Meridia? Well, the Daedric princes have their champions who come and go throughout the years. Maybe not as valuable as Umaril, but valuable nonetheless. It is not known why she would allow or maybe even set Umaril upon the world to destroy the divine works of men. In fact, it isn't even known if Meridia even had a hand in Umaril's return in 3E 433. However, she is one of the most obscure gods out of all the Daedric princes. Much about the Daedra, the gods and the powers of old is not known, and again, a lot of what we know comes mostly from fragments of recovered old accounts and other writings, like the Song of Pelinal. However, what we do know is that Umaril the Unfeathered's return contributed to the belief that not all legends are little else than folk tales. Umaril is the perfect example of a dangerous legend forgotten, and that in the future, it may be wise to be aware of the old powers whose stories are shrouded in mystery. You don't have to believe in legends, just believe in the possibility that they are more than just stories.